All right, good morning. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. I'll just say that over and over and over again. All right, so let's just jump right in. I'm using notes for the first time today, so I apologize for that, but I went through it, and it's either 25 minutes of rambling or 10 minutes of good talking. So I figured we would go with the 25 minutes of rambling. Just kidding. So what have we been talking about this whole time? We've been talking about starting just, I guess not the whole time, but we've been starting in August about servant leadership. So before we get into our topic today, and we're going to do this every single time that we're together, we're going to give you the definition again of servant leadership. And remember, we talked that servant leadership is seeking to serve by being mission and vision driven, but also focused on the customer. What I mean by that is servant leaders do not do their own thing. They are driven by something. And if you're in an organization or on a team or part of a family or part of a church or of a friend group, there is, whether it might not be written, there is a mission and there is a vision for that group. And whether you know it or not, there is people in that group, unless you're your own friend group, in your own church, in your own organization. There are people in that group, so it's really, really important that you understand what the customer needs. And remember, the idea of customer is not a transactional interaction. It is a relational interaction. People that look at customers just only as money are going to be ones that are always looking for more customers because those customers are going to leave because they don't feel the relationship. So that's servant leadership. And what we're going to be doing today, we're going to look at sacrificial leadership. But over the next few months, we're going to look at effective, responsive, visionary awareness. I love the word nimble. Nimble, the ability to change, and then also trustworthy leaders. And when we're done with this year, the goal is that you see servant leadership that's mission and vision driven, but also customer focused, but you see it from the perspective of these 7 traits. And it's going to be really important. It will give you some things to do. So today, we're talking about sacrificial leadership. And some of the questions that I was asking myself, and I just want to read them to you. What does it mean to be sacrificial? We use that word sacrificial, and probably some of you think of Old Testament stories and different things like that. But what actually does the word sacrificial mean? Then the other question I had, does the world even want sacrificial leadership? Do they want people? Do organizations want people that are sacrificial? When I am sacrificial, does it mean that I'm weak or I have given in? Because you hear the word compassion, you hear the word empathy, you hear the word meekness, and all of a sudden you think, I'm weak, I've given in, and we will talk about how that is not sacrificial. And can I be sacrificial to everyone? So let me start with a story real quick. 19 years ago today, and probably about this time, there were about 33 people that were passengers of Flight 93. And there were 5 to 6 crew members, and they were all going to leave Newark, New Jersey at about 8:20. They actually left at 8:20, just a few minutes before the first planes hit the World Trade Center. And they were on their way all the way to San Francisco. So it was a direct flight from Newark to San Francisco. So at probably about this time, they're getting ready, or they're already at the airport there in Newark, which is now called Liberty Airport. So they're all there, and they're getting ready to get on this plane, having no idea what's ahead of them in the next couple of hours. Fast forward a couple of hours, and all of a sudden, from the cockpit, they find out that the 2 planes have hit the World Trade Center, and the cockpit is trying to secure, and then they hear over the radio, "Mayday, Mayday," where the terrorists took over the cockpit. And then if you've read Todd Beamer's book or you've heard that story, the passengers on that plane decided to act because the plane somewhere over Illinois, Indiana, made a turn. And now it's heading back to what they think could have been Camp David, the presidential retreat, the White House, or the Capitol. So those individuals decided, well, we're not going to let this happen on our watch, so they stormed the cockpit. And the pilot, I was reading this again this morning just to make sure my facts were right, the terrorist who was the pilot at that time was going back and forth on the stick of the plane, trying to throw them off balance. But when they realized that they were going to breach the cockpit door and there was nothing the terrorists could do, the terrorists decided to flip the plane upside down and ram it into a field in the middle of Pennsylvania at 580 miles an hour. So when I ask you the question, does our world want sacrificial leaders? Yes, they do. They just don't know it. And a lot of times we don't talk about sacrificial leadership unless it's a crisis. There's a war and there's a soldier or there's an airman or there's a sailor that goes over and fights. He or she fights for our country, and we see their sacrifice, and they come back to Dover Air Base, and they're in this metal casket, and the casket is draped in an American flag. Every country has a way that their soldiers, their sailors, their airmen, their people come back. They reward sacrifice, but we don't look at sacrifice in the right way. I think we wait until it's like, oh my goodness, I need to be sacrificial now. I want to challenge you in the next few minutes, how can we actually be sacrificial on a consistent basis? Because you can. So first of all, I think we need to define it. Sacrificial leaders, or these are servant leaders, are sacrificial. So there's the thing. If you want to be a servant leader, you have to be sacrificial. And you give of your time, your talent, and your treasures. And we're going to break that down. You give of your time, your talent, and your treasures. Because it's not just about, hey, I'm going to go out and do this supernatural feat. Sometimes the most sacrificial leaders do something that you don't even know that they did for you. And that's what it means to be sacrificial. So we're going to go through and explain it, who, why, what, and how. I know you're surprised by that. But who should be a sacrificial leader? Let me just say it straight out. Everyone should be. You were created in the image of God, right? The most loving and sacrificial story is what Jesus did some 2,000 years ago in sacrificing for you and me, Philippians 2, who did not consider the equality with God something to be grasped, but gave of himself, gave up himself, and became submissive as a man. And then it goes on to say, became obedient to death, even death on a cross. So it wasn't like, hey, I'm going to go have a normal death. No, I'm going to go have the cruddiest of deaths possible at that time. Sacrificial leadership. And we see it. You were created to be sacrificial. It's not who we normally are. So here's the question that I had when I think about that. I'm like, okay, yeah, leaders seek to serve. Leaders are supposed to be sacrificial. How am I going to be sacrificial to everyone? You don't have to be. And actually, I would go out on a limb to say you shouldn't be. Sacrificial leaders cannot be sacrificial to everyone, because when you do that, you're looking for the glory instead of serving. What I mean by that is, if somebody comes to me, I can give of my time, but if it's not in my sphere of influence to deal with, I need to give that to somebody else. So sacrificial leaders really understand who is in their sphere of influence, and they're sacrificial to them, but not always to other people that are not in their sphere of influence, because they're in other people's sphere of influence. You just connect people to that. Andy Stanley's a pastor in Atlanta, wrote a book. It's like Choosing to Cheat. That's the title of the book. Really weird title. But it's the whole idea of choosing to cheat. And he says this: you will either cheat your family or your ministry. He was writing to pastors or church workers. If you cheat your family, you cheat both. But if you cheat your ministry and you never cheat your family, you will really not cheat your ministry. And what he is saying in that statement is, you have to make a choice of where are the priorities in your life. It is really easy at a place like Cedarville to make Cedarville a small g God and to forget about family. The hours that we put in and the hours that you put in. If there's not good life-work balance, the problem is you can become more important than Keegan and Audrey and Ethan and even Danielle, which is extremely dangerous. So sacrificial leaders realize that they cannot serve everybody. It's your sphere of influence. So why should you do this? Well, I've got 4 reasons. 1, it's good for your teammates. You were created to serve. So if I'm sacrificial, it is good for you. So me being sacrificial, I usually don't like to get up before 6:30. That's usually when my alarm goes off. So when 5:15, the alarm went off today. I'm not trying to brag about it. That's sacrificial, because that's an hour and 15 minutes of sleep, that I'm awake now before other people. It's sacrificial because I'm not home right now helping Danielle get the kids ready for school, even though they don't go to school till 11:20 today because we're trying out this new COVID thing. So the whole idea is sacrificial stuff it's for your good. And when you're sacrificial and you do your job and you go the extra mile, it's for my good. It's the good of the teammate. The good of the organization, hey guys, you're all going to be part of organizations. You're all going to be part of churches. You're all going to be part of families. It's the good. When you're sacrificial, it's good for that organization. There's a saying, it might not be your fault, but now it's your problem. So maybe something goes wrong and it might not be your fault, but as a sacrificial leader, you could step in and help. Last summer, we had one of these things happen. We're up in the event rooms. Not this summer, but we're up in the event rooms and we're moving a wall. And all of a sudden, the wall shears the sprinkler head off. Shears it off. You're talking 400 gallons a minute. First of all, black water because it's been in there a long time. But what happens is it was not, Mummy was there. It wasn't Mummy's fault. But it wasn't even Monty Veach, who works in Pioneer. It wasn't his fault. But he was in there in like a dress clothes. His boss was here pushing trash cans under that, trying to keep the water from seeping into where the bookstore is over all the millions and dollars of books. So it might not have been his fault, but now it's his problem. Just think about that. Think about that the next time you're walking around campus. Yeah, it might not be your fault that piece of paper is on the ground, but now you can take care of that in a safe way. Please don't go pick up Kleenexes at this point. It's also good for the customer. If I'm sacrificial to you, it's good for the customer because how I serve internally will dictate how I serve externally. Let me try to explain that. How I serve Abe dictates how I serve somebody I don't even know. We're so quick to want to serve other people that we forget to serve each other. It's for the good of the customer. You also need to make sure that you're meeting the customer's need. So if you're at Renova, the need of the customer is they need you to go quickly. They want you to go quickly if you're working there. So service that need. Be sacrificial in that. Realize that your friends are over there trying to talk to you. I'm going to be sacrificial right now, and I'm going to go serve the customer because that's relevant to the customer. And the last two, it's for your good. You were created to serve. You will never make enough money to be happy. Let that sink in. But every job, every position you have has extrinsic value, that's pay, and has intrinsic value, the way you feel about the job. When you're sacrificial, you're fueling and putting money in the intrinsic bank. And that's where the joy is. The intrinsic value far outweighs the extrinsic value in organizations. And the last one, so it's for your teammates' good, it's for the customer's good, it's for your good, but ultimately it's for God's glory. Matthew 5:16 says, "Let your light so shine so others can see your good works and give glory to God in heaven." And what I want to challenge you in is if both sides of this stage this was me over here and this was you over there, if we're only giving, you ever heard everybody's got to give 50%, 50-50, it's a 50-50 relationship? That's a bunch of crock. That's wrong. It's a 100% relationship, because if you give 50% and I only give 30%, there's still a gap, right? But if I'm going 100% and I get to maybe 40% today, and you're going 100% and you get to 60% today, we still met, didn't we? So in sacrificial leadership, it's not, well, Jacob didn't pull his share. No, it's not about other people. It's about you and doing what you need to do. All right, so we talked about the who should do it, everybody. You don't have to serve everybody. We talked about the why. It's for your good. It's for God's glory. It's for the teammates' good. And it's for the organization's good. But what does it mean? We talked about time, talent, and treasure. And let me go through that real quick. Time, you've got to be available. Peter Drucker says this about your schedule. You don't prioritize your schedule. Don't meaning you're like, okay, what do I got to do today? Oh, yeah, got to do that, got to do that. No, you schedule your priorities. There's a difference. So you've got to look at what's important in my life, and you schedule those things into your schedule and leave white space. If you're not an English major, you don't probably really understand white space. But white space means that you're leaving area, margin to be able to write into that. So if I pack my schedule from 8 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon completely full with meetings, I can't serve you sacrificially. I've got to leave white space in there so that I can actually move around. So one of the things that I do with that, if I say I'm going to meet with Sarah for 30 minutes, I schedule it for 45 minutes, knowing full well it's only going to take a half hour. That gives me 15 minutes that I know I'm going to have white space on. So that if Mariah walks in, I have time for that. But remember, it's not my place to be that sacrificial leader to everybody. So maybe I need to direct Mariah to Dan or to Lauren or to Chrissy or to Teresa or to Tim. Or maybe to Jessica because it's a marketing thing. That's what it means to be sacrificial. Your time, schedule your priorities, leave blank spaces in your calendar. Your talent, be dependable. We talk about this, that we want you to provide extraordinary effort. If you're going to be sacrificial, you cannot be status quo. Because you're really not being sacrificial if you just come in, that's good enough. That good enough is not even close to being good enough. So make sure you're dependable. Strive for excellence, do your job. And the last one is treasure. And when you think of treasure, you think of probably, if you don't, I do, I think of Treasure Island, one of the old Disney movies or other things like that where I'm looking for hidden treasure, I'm looking for stuff like that. Your treasure, and when you're sacrificial, is not about you. It's about what the other person values. So my son Ethan loves just to be around people and know that you're in the house. Keegan wants quality time. So he will act up more and more and more if he's not getting quality time. For me, I just want to be in the house. I'm like Ethan. I just want to be in the house. Danielle's different than I am. She wants that quality time. She wants that time where I don't have the iPad out, I don't have the TV on, I don't have my phone out, I don't have my watch on. It's just her time. So in being sacrificial to my wife, it means that I know what she treasures, and I give to that area. So it's my time. I have blank spaces in my calendar. It's my talent. I give everything I have. It's my treasure that I look at what other people are doing. And the last one, how do we do this? So we've talked about who should do it. Everybody should. We talked about the why. What's for good of your team. It's a teammate. Good for you. Good for God. It's for His glory. What does it take? Well, your time, talent, and treasures. How do you actually do it? Let me start with these three things. Boundaries. You cannot be sacrificial to everybody. You have to have proper boundaries. You've got to know your sphere of influence. Meaning that you are not supposed to walk around campus and feel the pressure right now that you have to serve the 4,298 other students here at Cedarville. No, God put you exactly where He wants you. You serve in your sphere of influence. And hopefully that might inspire others to serve in their sphere of influence. So if somebody comes to you and say that you're in class council and somebody from CAB comes to you and they just need some help with their job, that's fine for you to listen, but you should direct them back to the people who can actually help them. One of the dangers of sacrificial leadership is you think that you could serve everybody and it makes you feel really good, but it's not to the organization's benefit and it's not to that team member's benefit. So for me, there's a lot of times people come ask, I don't know why, but people think that we operate a lot more at the institution than we do. And they come and ask us for stuff. The best thing that I can do is connect them to the right place. So the info group, you guys, that's what you do all the time. You get a lot of phone calls that you have nothing, it's not even close to our responsibility. And the best thing that you can do is get them to the right place. That's sacrificial leadership. It's like, okay, this is not about me. I want the best for the customer, the best for the organization, so I'm going to get them to the right place. So you got to have boundaries. You got to be filled. So think of it like a pitcher. If you're sacrificial and you're not having other people fill you, there's going to be a problem because you're going to get empty. And so I realize that when I get cranky, it's because I haven't let other people fill me. And sometimes when you're sacrificial and you're thinking about, I got to be sacrificial, you don't want other people to serve you. If you've ever watched The Office, it's when Dwight and Andy are in a competition about who's going to serve the last person last. That's kind of our MO, though, isn't it? It's funny. It's like, hey, wait, that's kind of cool. It's the office. But it's kind of how we operate. Well, if I serve Nathan or I serve Micah, then they've got to serve me, and then I've got to serve them back, and then they got to serve me back. It becomes keeping up with the Joneses. That's not the way that it is. You're going to run out of gas. You're going to run out of stuff to do if you don't let other people fill you. Excuse me. And most importantly, if you're not spending time letting God fill you on a daily basis. Is that a habit in your life? Letting God fill you. So you have boundaries, you got to be filled. And then, in conclusion, you've got to have a structure. Meaning, it might not be my structure, but it's going to be your structure. So my structure in the morning is I have my calendar. I sit down and I work through my calendar every single morning to make sure it's structured in a way that I've got white space, I can serve people. I also make sure that when things come across my plate and I'm like, okay, this is SGA, I could deal with it real quick. Well, that's Dan's responsibility, so I forward it off to Dan. It might feel, and sometimes I'll be honest with you, it feels like I'm being lazy, but I'm not, because I'm allowing a teammate to serve in the way that he needs to serve. So you got to understand that you got to have a structure, and I say this all the time about structure. It protects you. You got to protect yourself. You got to protect your bandwidth, your capacity load. I think a lot of times at Cedarville, capacity might be right here, and we're operating right at top capacity. The problem with that, if something comes in, you've got no wiggle room. You got to operate a little lower. You got to lower your capacity a little bit so you have room to serve other people. So structure protects you. It respects others. So if I try to do everything for Dan when it comes about student organizations, I'm not respecting him. I'm not respecting his ability. I'm not respecting the time that he's put in, the sacrifice that he's doing. I'm looking at it for myself. And the last thing is, so first of all, it protects, it respects, and then it builds a culture of, hey, we expect this from everybody. So when we look at sacrificial leadership, you've got to understand when you give of your time, your talent, and your treasure, it's different from every single person in the room. You need to have boundaries, you need to be filled, you got to have different structures that works for you. But the ultimate goal is this, that we are going to serve others. That is the ultimate goal. And in our group, what we're trying to do is I want you to make sure that to be sacrificial, you're striving to do your best at all times. Your best. Not the best that other people need to do, but your best. Well, my job's not big enough. My job's not the SGA president or the SGA chaplain. Do your job. Be sacrificial. Do your job. And you got to strive for excellence in everything you do. And when you think, I started with the story of Flight 93 on 9/11, but I would go back to say probably the greatest story on sacrificial leadership happened over 2,000 years ago when Jesus became a man. When Jesus took on our bodies, came from heaven to here, took on the idea that he's going to be tempted, he's going to have to deal with stubbed toes and different things like that, and relationships and things like that. But then at the end of his life decided, I'm going to sacrifice for their good and for God's glory. So as Christians, we should be more sacrificial leaders than anybody. And I would throw this gauntlet down. Generally, we're not. Because we make excuses like, well, they treated me bad. Well, I think Jesus was treated pretty bad, don't you? They didn't love me when I should have been loved. Well, Jesus' 11 disciples, one of his disciples betrayed him for silver. The other 10 said, peace, and ran. One of his disciples, while he's in Pilate's house, is at the fire out there. Peter's out there, and he said, no, I didn't know him. And he uses foul language. As Christians, we justify not being sacrificial because of how other people treated us. We need to be the ones that are more sacrificial than anybody. Not for our glory, but for the good of other people, the good of the organization. It will benefit you, but ultimately for God's glory. That's sacrificial leadership. Give of your time, your talent, and your treasures.